Welcome to Friday night's video in our Master Series. This is the 22nd video in our Master Series and the 9th video in our editing phase. We are continuing dealing with clicks, plops, and bleeps. So as we continue along here, the next solution is we've already dealt with automation, and you can sometimes automate it out with volume automation like we talked about. And another thing is filtering it out. Now, normally in a studio, you've got an equalizer. You might have some other type of filters that you got, but unless you got MATLAB, I don't know a lot of studio people that have some of the filters that I had working in MATLAB, so you're probably stuck with the EQ for the most part. But it can do a really good job. If you've got this audio anomaly right here, you see this spike here, and you see what's going on. I've high passed or low pass filtered that out to about that point, and I can put this on event effects so that I either put it on another track or event effects it, meaning in my DAW you can select an event and then put an effects on that single event. I don't know if you can do that or not. I have to write another track. But I've put this low pass filter on there with my EQ, and then I'm just going to render it out of there. And it's gone. You can see if I restore it where it's at, and if I render it, it's basically gone and hardly even messed with the file at all. What I did is I took a copy of that area, command copied it, and then went down to this area, selected this track where I want it, command paste it, and it's good to go. That spike is gone. I rendered that on there with that hot low pass filter, and it's completely, you can see where that spike was right there. And it's brought it right down to where it's supposed to be normal with the rest of the piece of audio. It's completely eliminated. That can be situational. Sometimes that can work really good if you can pull the piece of audio out and do that and it doesn't affect the rest of the sound. Sometimes you can and can't. That just takes some fussing. There are some times where you might have to fuss around with it to where you start looking at it and you start having to attenuate it. You might initially think it's one of these spikes going on here, when actually it was this stuff going on up here that is actually that spike. And I just low pass filtered it out of there. When you might have been trying to notch EQ it out with this kind of stuff, and that's not where it was at. He's normally up in the higher end. Sometimes not, sometimes it's in the lower end, and you'll find yourself doing this and trying to get it out that way instead of a low pass filter using the high pass filter. But it can be very situational because there's sometimes a lot of other sound going on that you detrimentally affect the sound of the rest of the audio around it. So it's just something to take some fussing around with. Sometimes you can higher low pass filter it out like that and render it, and sometimes you can notch filter it out. It just takes some experimentation. And you go back to that video on filtering and you just have to experiment with it until you can find a solution that works using that type of a solution. The next one is you can sometimes leave a gap. I know this sounds funny. We talked about gaps can sometimes be the issue, but if you leave a gap that's between 4 and 6 samples, if it's only between 4 and 6 samples, sometimes you can get away with it. You've got this little section that's a little teeny problem, like this one right here, and you're looking at it, and it's like, if you can get it to where it's only 4 or 5 samples, in length, and you've cut it out, and you've made sure it's only 4 or 5 samples, sometimes you can just cut it out and it doesn't cause a problem. Sometimes you might have to take a double click and create a piece of blank audio, drag it in there like that, and then select those pieces of audio together and command bounce them together. Does that make sense? It does, and try to deal with that way, to where you basically have a blank piece of audio that's filled that in. But sometimes just leaving a gap. Sometimes you just leave a gap and then bounce them. I mean, sometimes it's pretty simple that you don't even have to do that. You can just leave that piece of audio like that, like I showed you with the gap there, and I've cut it out and then deleted it, and then I've just highlighted the 2 tracks around it and command bounce them, and it actually bounced them together, left a blank area that the click is gone. That it can be a solution that works very well. So the next thing we get into, you can sometimes just cut right at the spot and put a fade on it. I've seen a couple times where I'll have a situation like that, and I'll just go down and actually cut right at the spot. Actually cut the piece of audio right there at the spot, put fades on either side of it, and actually fade it out like that. And if it's not too bad, sometimes that will deal with the issue. Sometimes you got to fuss with it a little bit, but sometimes that'll just take care of the click or plop, and then just bounce them together when you're done. So it's basically, you can see it took care of some of it there. I didn't fuss with it too much, but I could have fussed with it more to where I eventually just basically delete it out of there, then command bounce it out of there, and I basically got that. That click is basically gone. You see it's gone down to that. That might not be audible. You have to check and fuss with it and see. But sometimes that can take care of the issue very easily. So now we talked about everything else. There's a couple things, other things in here, but there's a couple other solutions. One of the solutions in RX6. Now, in RX6, you can fix this problem so easy it's not even funny. You can just go in here and go D-click. I fussed around this till it's about where it is, and I processed it. It's gone, bro. I mean, it's just gone. There's no click, plop, bleep, nothing going on there, no how, no way. Now, if I go back and show you what was going on there in this piece of software, that you can go down right down to the sample and see what is going on there. You can actually see that. And in this piece of software, instead of doing that, I can actually just fix it. I can grab hold of the samples and get it to where it's flowing with the stuff that's going around it better, so I don't have that issue at all, and it's just gone. You know, the piece of software, you can see that there's a little thing going up there, that there's still somewhat of an issue, but for the most part it's gone. And at this point it's probably very unlikely it's audible. It might be, and you might have to fuss with it. You might have to come back into it and really fuss with it until you can get it to where, why is it still showing an audio anomaly there? It's showing it up here. Why is that? What did I do? You know, so you have to start fussing with it again to try to figure out what's going on. But you can actually manipulate the samples here like that, or you can actually click it. I mean, you know, and it does a pretty dang good job. There's no doubt about it. But normally you can just fuss with the samples like that, or actually use that. If you can see what happens when you start fussing with samples sometimes. But, you know, sometimes it's a pretty simple solution. You gotta just fuss a little bit until you figure out exactly what's going on to make that go away, because it's obviously interfering and interacting with other samples around it, and so you're just gonna have to fuss with it until you can get it to where it's inaudible. And that's dealing with it just right down to the binary sample level. And you can see it's still showing something, but it might not be audible. You just might have to fuss with it. But the declip thing works pretty well. Also, something like MATLAB. In MATLAB, that you may not really be into it, but in MATLAB you can actually manipulate the samples. So if I go into something like MATLAB, I've got the samples right here. I can visualize it in MATLAB. Here's just a simple signal analyzer, and I can see what's going on there. And then I can also go and manipulate the samples. I've got this sample here and this sample here. And between 0.0016, oh no, I think it quit. Between 0.0016 and minus 0.0029 is about negative 0.0007. So I just go in here and I can click this, cut it out, and then go minus 0.0007. Now that's somewhere in between, in the middle. Oops, I don't know what I did there. So it'd be minus 0.0007 right there. So that should even it out. So it's pretty simple that you can actually manipulate those samples to whatever you want. Or I could go 0.00000 return, and it's basically set at 0. You know, and you can actually manipulate the samples in MATLAB. You can manipulate the samples kind of like an RX6 with some software that's included in MATLAB. But it's really simple just to drag that piece of audio in here, double click it, put it in a workspace, and then it'll just put it on in here for you. You can manipulate the sample and then save it and smooth it out very easily. And this is the way we had to do it before we had RX6. So, you know, does that make sense? And so there's a bunch of solutions for that. You know, most of those solutions should work pretty well. You can get other pieces of software. I do believe like Pro Tools you can actually manipulate the sampling. In my DAW you can't that way, but RX6 is one of the purchases I recommended you deal with that you get anyway. So basically, those are some simple solutions. There's some other thoughts if you want to look at this and stop the video and take a look at that. I'm not going to get into those too much because there are some pretty far out solutions. If I hadn't fixed it by this point, then it's going into garbage because normally I should be able to have fixed it by now. So those are some good solutions for you to fix your audio problems and your clicks, plops, and bleeps. One thing that we didn't talk about is that sometimes you get things that are happening like you're not sure whether this is a click, plop, and bleep or it's part of these issues. That when we get into flow editing, is it a ta, duh, fa, ka, something like that, or some kind of transient on a drum that we're going to deal with in flow editing? That you're going to have to make a note about it and go, no, I'm dealing with that in flow editing. That's not a click, plop, and bleep. That's something like that. When it's a click, plop, and bleep, it's pretty obvious it's click, plop, and bleep. I mean, most of the time that you can see what's going on with it and visually see what's happening with it, and it's fairly obvious. Sometimes it's not, like I showed you on this one, and you're like, well, how am I going to fix that? And it's like, well, that is a click, plop, and bleep. But normally we're dealing with a complex waveform. So the cool thing about a complex waveform is that it's basically like a sinusoid that's distorted. So you can grab something very like it, like that right there. I've got that click right there. So I'm going to take that right there at zero crossing, and I'm going to cut that out. And then I'm going to go right over here. That's very similar to that. And I'm going to command copy that. I'm going to come over to here, zoom in really close, and I'm going to command paste that. Now, that was very similar to the other piece of waveform. And I've got a really small gap here that probably isn't going to matter at all because it's probably less than 6 samples. And I'm just going to highlight everything in there and fix the problem. And a lot of people don't see that because you can't even see anything happening there anymore. It's like gone. Does that make sense? There's a lot of very simple solutions for dealing with it and a lot of complex solutions for dealing with it. So I hope that helps you. If you have some input, I've got a lot more complex solutions for it, but if it gets more complicated than that, then it's probably not worth keeping. You can deal with all kinds of other ways of doing it, experimenting, using some of the solutions I'm talking about together to try to fix the problem, and like hybrid solutions of fixing clicks, plops, bleeps. Trust me, I run into some clicks, plops, and bleeps and some anomalies that just take some fussing trying to use these solutions or integrate other solutions, trying to figure out how to get it to stop so it doesn't click, plop, and bleep like that. So I certainly hope you enjoyed this series or this part of the clicks, plops, and bleeps in our editing phase, and I certainly hope you investigate into using them and experimenting around with them and have some fun fixing them and getting to know them better so that they're not such a huge problem when you run into them, that you can fix them fairly easily and are fairly comfortable with the solutions that I've showed you. So peace, hope, love. I certainly hope you enjoyed this video in our editing phase, and I'll see you in the next video when we start dealing with tempo and timing.